So the question is, what's the difference between a shift versus a movement? So let's do that for both the demand curve and the supply curve. So remember that the demand curve is a function of the price of the good itself. So let's say that this is the demand for good X. It'd be the price of that it would be a function of the price of good X, income, the price of related goods, number of buyers, preferences, etc., etc., etc. So what that means is that when I draw the demand curve for good X, it's downward sloping. It's downward sloping, and that downward sloping nature, that movement along the curve, can be explained by the law of demand. And what the law of demand says is that as the price, let's just say, falls, quantity demanded rises, ceteris paribus. And what does ceteris paribus mean? It means that all of this other junk is holding constant. And what that movement along the curve is explaining is a movement, let's say, from A to B. That as the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. A movement along the curve. The shift of the curve comes when I change one of these other things. So the movement, or sorry, the shift of the curve would say, let's say that this is a normal good and that income increases. Well, we know what that means is that the demand curve shifts out. And what we did in that lecture is we talked about each of these variables and how each of them can shift the curve. So basically, for a shift versus a movement, if you're hearing about just the price of the good itself, that's movement. And there you're using the law of demand. If you're hearing about some other thing changing, then it's going to be a shift of the curve. Let's do this now for supply. So supply is a function. Let's say that this is the price, good X again, that supply is a function of the price of good X, costs, the price of related goods, future prices, etc., etc., etc. And that as we draw this out, that the supply curve, that the law of supply says as price, let's say, falls, quantity supplied falls. That's going to be a movement along the curve, a movement that we could see right here. As the price falls, the quantity supplied falls. And we need to add to this ceteris paribus, which again is Latin for everything else held constant. That would be all of these other things being held constant. That's a move. This right here is a movement along the curve. If I change one of these other things, it's going to shift the curve. If I increase costs, that's going to decrease the supply curve. And so, just like you did with demand, if you're hearing about something other than the price of the good itself, then you're going to be probably shifting the curve. If you're only hearing about that good, that's going to be a movement along that curve.